This is the sometimes I feel I've got to run away. I've got to get away from the pain you drive into the heart of me. The love we share seems to go nowhere, and I've lost my light. For I toss and turn, I can't sleep at night. Once I ran to you, now I run from you. This tainted love you've given, I give you all a boy could give you. Take my tears and that's not me. Oh, tainted love, tainted love. Now I know I've got to run away. I've got to get away. You don't really want anymore from me to make things right. You need someone to
Love the song.
hold you tight, and you think love is to pray, but I'm sorry, I don't pray that way. Once I ran to you, now
What's up, Laura?
I run from you. This tainted love you've given, I give you all a boy could.
Not much. I just found out about the how if you're 50% or more disabled as a veteran, you can get a property tax deduction.
Oh, 50% disabled for property tax?
Yeah.
You only need to be 10% disabled to not have any VA funding fee for the life of your loans. So there's all
Yeah,
kinds of, like, disabled veteran benefits are actually really tremendous. They're actually one of the only protected classes as well as far as government contracts. So if you're a disabled veteran and you start a plumbing business or you start a remodeling company, you can actually bid on federal jobs, and there's a certain allocation that specific jobs are actually set aside for disabled veteran businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, taking you know, they'll waive the first $150,000 of assessed value of your residential property is pretty awesome. That'll save us a lot of money.
All right, I'm put some of this stuff away. Regretfully have to put away my 80s Pandora mix. Close the
How,
window.
how much did you say you have to be disabled?
50% or more.
50%
Okay.
for residential property and then only 10% for to waive VA funding fee, and there's a bunch of other benefits. So there's different depending on VA loans and then municipal tax benefits. So this is one thing you got to look out for. You got to look out for when you buy a property, and you got to check the exemptions. For instance, you may buy a property that's owned by a church or owned by a disabled veteran or owned by a senior citizen. And the lender may calculate your taxes based on the tax prorations of what the current seller is paying. They just look at they go to the tax amount and they see what it is. They don't do the adjusted aggregate, which is what will it actually be when you take possession, right? And so those may be a huge step up in tax value, and you may have an artificially low two things. You may have an artificially low mortgage payment. Two, you may have an inadequate amount in reserves, meaning that your lender is calculating. Quicken Loans does this a lot, by the way, because they just go by whatever they do, an automatic pull. But they're not from Alaska, so they don't understand that our property taxes vary, and we have all these various discounts. So then they'll calculate your mortgage payment on whatever the current seller is paying, and then a year later they'll discover that your account is shy. And they'll not only are they going to increase your mortgage payment, but now you need to make up for the loss. So that's where it's very important that you work with an experienced. That's why so many people just say, oh, well, Quicken Loans are all lenders. Listen, that's why you always try to work with a local lender. A local lender will know the difference and knows what to look out for. Other things I've seen lenders make mistakes on is, I don't know if you're aware of this, but you can actually buy two properties at the same time using a residential mortgage. Let's say that you buy a house and the lot adjacent next door is vacant. You can buy both properties on one loan. You can buy two pieces of real estate, a house with a vacant lot. You got to find a comp or a comparable sale that is equal to that house and the vacant lot combined, as if they were on one. But you can buy two as long as they touch and they're adjacent. And I've done this several times. Well, I had a client who was shopping, my wife's Sveta, they shopped her. And they're like, why is her payment so much higher than the payment that I got a quote from Quicken? We're using Quicken Loans. So then we dug into and what they had done is they had only looked at the taxes on the house, not on the taxes on the house and the lot next door, same owner, that were being sold together. So their tax prorations were way off. And in Anchorage, our taxes are so ridiculously high that if you miss the taxes on a lot, that's a lot of money. Like, $1,200, $1,500 a year, even on vacant land. So interesting. Well, that's awesome. Hey, it's 6:31. It's Rex time. Are you guys ready to get started?
Yeah.
We're gonna be dropping knowledge bombs like a blitzkrieg because this is one of my favorite topics. You guys probably won't believe this because it sounds so boring, and for a lot of people it is a yawner because it's not sexy. But guys, real estate. Listen, you are not in the real estate industry. You are in a contracts business that happens to make money through real estate. But everything that we do is contracts. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. Okay? So before we get started, I want to make sure everybody's familiar. If you've got your cameras on, you don't want people to catch you picking your nose or scratching your butt or whatever you're doing, your cat climbing on your face, then you can always disable your camera. That way people don't know. That way you have your privacy moment. So just go down to lower and you get to stop video, hit the stop video button. Unless you have something to say, go ahead and mute your video or mute your audio. That way I don't hear you. That way I don't hear you choking, coughing on a fur ball or whatever it is. Go ahead and silence your camera and your video. If you want to, one of the best ways, if you want to throw a question out there but don't want to interrupt the conversation, is to use a chat box. So if you go down the lower thing, you get a little chat, you can hit the chat button, bring up the chat, and then you can just type it in there. So he says, is this how you start a meeting, Cody? If you're talking about 80s retro music, yes. I start every meeting with Duran Duran. And then who had Tainted Love by Soft Cell. That was Soft Cell. So many of you don't know this, but I used to be the lead singer in a metal band in the 80s. And so I've got this brain that it just absorbs lyrics of songs and song titles and artists. It's like a huge sponge for useless information. Okay, so today is a really exciting topic. We're going to talk about contracts, and we're talking about the residential purchase and sell. Now, the residential purchase and sell agreement that we use in real estate, I say residential, and everybody just thinks houses, but it's not. Residential is typically anything fourplex and under, but the truth is that the residential purchase and sell agreement is used by the real estate industry oftentimes up to properties that are 12, 16, 24 units. So up to very large. And what it is it's a property that's intended for the purpose of residential purchases, which is like people living in it, right? And you'll notice that our residential purchase and sell agreement, although it doesn't say commercial, there is a commercial one that applies to strip malls, warehouses, and stuff like that. The residential covers 90% of real estate, okay? Anything that someone owner occupies or something that somebody would completely lease out for the purposes of rentals for a 30-day period or longer, right? So I've used these contracts even as much as a purchase of 24 units, okay? You'll notice the provision. So when we say residential, I don't want you to get fixed on the fact that, well, think of a house. No, these contracts are actually pretty malleable, and we'll talk about as we go through on how they can be used effectively to even do properties as big as like 24 units, okay? Again, in order to make money in real estate, you need to understand that you are less in the real estate business and more in the contract business. We say it's not the price you pay, but it's what? It's not the price you pay, but what is it that you make money in real estate? Anybody know? How do we make money in real estate? Because it's not the price, it's what? Terms. Tammy, you're totally awesome. Tammy gets a voracious high five from the Rex group here. Good job, Tammy. It's the terms. What are the terms? Well, the terms are established in the contract. What is it both parties mutually agree? Guys, that is how you make your money. But however, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. If it's not in writing, okay, it doesn't have a standard, because standards have consequences. I want you guys to think about this in a broader context of life in general, okay? And that is, if you want to increase the quality of your life, you increase your standards. What's the difference between a standard and a suggestion? Okay? Anybody, what's the difference between a standard and a suggestion?
Standard is practice.
Standards have consequences.
Ah.
Suggestions have no consequences. If life is a suggestion and all we have is just, you know what, I think that's a good idea, but if you don't, well, then so be it. Well, then that's a values issue, isn't it? So then, and this is why I'm saying it's more than outside real estate. This is in general. You think about it, let that sink in, right? That in order for you, if you want to dramatically change your life on a profound level and all things that you do, increase your standards. Do we tell our children and we tell their children's friends, like we tell our kids, like, don't hang out with those people that have low standards. You hang out with people who inspire you to do great things. Okay, well, people who inspire you to great things, if they don't like what you're doing, they're not going to befriend you. They're not going to hang out with you. There's consequences for bad behavior. Well, eventually, as we go up the chain of standards, you run into real estate, and you run into purchase contracts, which is where the rubber meets the road. Now we're talking about real standards where they mean money. Okay, so what we're going to go through is we're going to do a purchase and sell agreement, and I'm going to show you that I'm going to tell you so I've been an investor for 25 years. And for those of you who don't know me too well, or those of you who are just learning, so I got in real estate in about 2007, 2008. I was a sloper for many years, over 16 years. I was a fire protection contractor. I got into real estate as an investor because I want to be on the inside. I wanted to learn everything. I'm voraciously curious. I applied all my ADHD and all the learning learning deficiencies they told me I had in elementary school, and applied them aggressively into being an entrepreneur. And I just found out it wasn't that I didn't have attention. It's that I just wanted to learn everything. I just wanted to know everything all the time right now. So as I got into it, so eventually as an investor, I said, you know what, the best way for me to learn is just get into the industry and get a sales license. And as I got into a sales license, I built a big team. I had for a period of probably about 8 years, my team and my sales were in the top 10 of sales in Anchorage. In my best year, I think we sold over 300 houses. My best year, that was 2014. That was the year I ended up owing the IRS $86,000 at the end of the year. It was a whole different life lesson to learn about setting away for taxes. But I built this big team and went crazy, and then I realized that's not the life I wanted to live. I wanted to live, like, in order to go big, you need to be small. And so I stripped away, I sold the team business, I did everything, and I became a broker. During that course of selling thousands of pieces of real estate, I learned, and my learned was that it was how we negotiate contracts. What's in the terms that makes you money, right? And most of what we focus on is a distraction and not important, but there are some things that are very, very important that affect you monetarily. And it's easy for us to focus on things that aren't important, okay? And so when we look at this contract, when we read through this purchase and sell agreement, I want to make sure that you're aware of some things that are hidden in your purchase and sell agreement. 90% of the realtors that I teach, and I'm president and broker of Real Estate Brokers, and I teach all the real estate training there. So once a week, tomorrow at noon, we're going to have contract training. We'll have business building training. But I'm really surprised that people who have been in this business 20, 30 years and have like become so used to using the same contracts. It's like a frog in a boiling pot of water. We've all heard the analogy. They don't notice that things have changed. They haven't noticed that this line item on page 8 is now worded differently because the forms meeting a couple months ago changed things, right? So we're going to go through this, and I'm going to show you where licensees make mistakes and where you as an investor, more importantly, when using contracts, you need to understand how these apply to state law and how they end up affecting you, okay? So today we're just going to focus on we're going to start on the purchase and sell agreement. Are you guys have any questions before we get started? Okay, I know I come at you like an avalanche, like I'm just like a lot of energy, a lot of stuff going on here. I had a 5-hour energy about 45 minutes ago, so I'm apexing. Okay, so, all right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Now just give me a second, I'm gonna share a screen, we're gonna bring up the purchase and sell agreement, all right? So out of a, let's see what we've got here. How many, before I switch my screen real quick, I'm gonna check and see how many people, what do we got here? Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and share a screen real quick, and then I just wanna see what our audience looks like. We got 25 participants. This is awesome. Okay, we're supposed to have up to 50. We have over 50 people registered. So guys, this is the purchase and sell agreement that is used in probably 95% of real estate transactions in Anchorage, and even very, very similarly with only minor alterations in Kenai, Juneau, and Fairbanks, okay? So what you're gonna discover is 10 pages, okay? Guys, when I first got into real estate in 2007-8, do you know this was only a 6-page document? So over the last 15 to 16 years, the question is, come to you is, holy crap, there's 40% more pages. What happened? What changed? Okay, so we're gonna go through this. I'm gonna show you things that are very important. The first part of this purchase and sell agreement is very easy. What is the date of the contract? What are the brokerages? Are there real estate brokerages involved? Okay, and what are the licensees? So one thing that's very important, the state wants you to understand who represents who. So as a listing licensee, listen, a listing licensee represents the seller, but the selling licensee represents the buyer. Right out of the bat, it's already confusing. Can we all agree that you would think that the selling licensee, if you were outside, would be the seller? No. Selling is who brought the buyer. Okay? So you got a listing licensee, and then what is their representation? Are they assisting people without representation? Right? Are they assisting both as a neutral licensee? Are they a mediator, or do they represent people? Most often, the seller has their own licensee, and then the buyer has their own licensee. Okay? Here's what you need to know. I'm gonna jump back and forth a lot. This is huge, is who represents who. Okay? if the seller of the property has a business relationship outside real estate with the realtor, that realtor can't be neutral. Let me ask you something. If I were selling a property and I was a selling licensee selling my buddy's house, and my buddy, by the way, and I own a business together, and we've got other things going on, and maybe even he's got 2 other listings that I'm selling for him, am I really neutral? If I bring a buyer and I say I represent the buyer, am I really neutral? Can I say that I'm on the fence and I'm just trying to help both people? Or could it be seen as being a misrepresentation of relationship? Because, well, that realtor does multiple deals with this individual and he has financial interest outside this real estate transaction. Well, I will tell you, a lot of realtors will end up getting themselves in trouble, because if a buyer feels bent and they take them to the real estate commission and they're going to say, well, you said you're neutral, you have to prove that you were neutral. And if that licensee has a vested interest outside this outside this contract with the seller, you're not neutral, because he owes you money on other deals. And if you don't perform and do what he wants, he could cancel you and you could lose money. So one thing is, make sure that your licensee is really neutral. Okay? So right out of the get-go, we're learning new things. So is the individual really neutral, and is there another vested interest outside this relationship? That's a good question to ask as an investor. We're only first paragraph into it. Second, buyers. Who is the buyer? And the buyer here deposits earnest money, okay, of. And in this contract, it says, what is the earnest money? How much is it? By the way, guys, we don't take cash. No brokerage will take your big old fat stacks of cash. Just go to a bank and get a certified check. Nobody wants your dirty money with glitter on it, okay? Not only that, but it's hard to trace. It might get stolen. So we only take cashier's checks, certified checks, or personal. And here it is. Here's a personal note due on. Where is this earnest money going to be held? Is it the listing brokerage, the selling brokerage, or a title company? So I will tell you that if you are the buyer, you want it at your brokerage, the selling brokerage. If you're the seller, you want it at the selling brokerage. But really, the most neutral place you can do it is at a title company, at their trust account, okay? I will tell you that not all brokers, they're sworn to do a code of that. I will tell you that not all brokers, how do I put this? There's good and bad in every industry. You guys know this. You guys know at your job, there's somebody who's working next to you and you're like, how the hell have you made it this far in life without falling on a pair of freaking scissors, okay? There are brokers like that, and there's really, really good ones out there. Most of our big brokers are really good, and then there's some individuals that are just mildly incompetent. And if you have any concern with your earnest money, just pick the title company, okay? So where's the property located, okay? So here's what I want you to look at. It says, hereby deposits earnest money, and we're gonna go into this. This is gonna come back. How do we know the earnest money's been deposited, right? Now we have the address of the property, we have the recording district, and we have the address and the legal. The legal is really important because that is the actual identification of the property and what makes it unique. Now we have, what is the purchase price, okay? And is there a down payment, and what do we expect that down payment? A lot of people just put the word minimum in here. It means whatever the minimum down payment is, okay? But obviously if it's a conventional loan, you put 20%. This can oftentimes be important for you to fill out. If you're using a conventional loan, did you know there's a 3% conventional loan, a 5%, 10%, 25%? If you're using conventional financing or use a loan, you might just put in what it is, because the larger your down payment, the better it makes you look as a consumer. As a buyer, the larger your down payment, the more sweat you have in the game, and the larger the buyer, the better the seller is. Okay? Now, just to go back real quick, because I apologize, your earnest money up here, your earnest money in the state of Alaska is typically 1% of the purchase price, okay? And that is that it's a $500,000 sale, you need to put $5,000. So, what is earnest money? What is earnest? What's the purpose of earnest money? As I drink my iced tea. Money to show you're interested in the property, skin in the deal. You guys are both right. It's called consideration. You're throwing money over here and you're sticking it into a neutral third party so that the buyer defaults, the seller gets that money. That's damages for the buyer not buying the property. Yep, good faith, commitment to purchase. Those are all great, all excellent ideas. But basically, it's the buyer's sweat in the game, okay, or skin in the game, as Trevor says. Okay. What you need to understand is 1% may not be enough. Is there a case where 1% earnest money, which is standard, the standard, does not meet? Well, absolutely. Let's say I'm selling a $200,000 house. It's $200,000, $250,000. Say I'm selling a house out in Wasilla that's $250,000. Well, in order to sell that house, what does a seller typically have to pay for out of pocket before they even record? Well, they might have home inspection repairs. That could be like $1,500. Well and septic inspection. There's another $1,000. By the way, we're already up to $2,500. Home inspection repairs and well and septic. We're at $2,500. We're at the earnest money on a $250,000. We're not even done. They might have to pay for, I don't know, a resale certificate if all or part of the property is owned in common with other properties. Let's say that there's an airstrip. It's got airstrip access. Well, then you may have a resale certificate for airstrip access. There's another $250. You have the appraisal. There's $800 to $1,000. You may have a heating system inspection. You may have, and the list goes on. So the earnest money of 1% is a rule of thumb, but sometimes that thumb gets really big and it's not enough. So when you're a buyer and you really want a property, I know it says 1%, but if you really want the property, put more skin in the game. Show that, hey, listen, if I don't perform, if you get my earnest money, if I get to the closing table and just don't buy it, you're not out the cost of that. I will tell you, oftentimes the 1% is not nearly enough, okay? So something to take into consideration when it comes to earnest money, okay? So we got back, you guys should be able to see my contract, my form here again. So we got purchase price, we got earnest money. Where is it being held? Legal, what is the purchase price? Does the buyer, do they or do they not intend to occupy a property? Obviously, if it were an 11-plex, you have no intention to occupy. What kind is it? Is it a single family condominium or other? Why is this important? Because your loan. If a guy's buying a duplex, right? Can duplexes be single family? Yes, they can. Can a single family be converted to a duplex? Yes, they can. You can just remove a door. There's certain things you can do. You can take I can take a 6-plex, convert it to a 4-plex or whatever it is. But for the purposes of the lender, we need to know what is the intention you intend. What kind of loan program are you using? Okay. And if you change from a single family to a duplex in order to get easier or vice versa or whatever, then you need to amend your contract to state that, hey, property type is to be X, okay? That's for the lender, because the lender needs to know. Is there an all cash offer? If it's all cash, no loan is needed to purchase the property. Guys, all cash means no loan is needed to use the property. If you're buying the property and you're using a hard money lender, that's not a cash purchase because you're getting a loan. You're getting a loan. It's just not typical. It is a finance type, and we'll go into that. Some people say, oh, I'm getting a HELOC and I'm going to get a HELOC on a property, but that's not a cash purchase. Anytime your purchase is contingent on you getting financing, whether you're pulling money out of a retirement account or you're pulling, which is a loan, or you're pulling money out of a HELOC, or you're doing a hard money lender, those are all loans. If you put cash purchase in there and then you show up and you say, oops, I need a HELOC, you're in default, buyer. Buyer, you have breached the contract because of very accordance to this, cash is no loan is needed. And if you need a loan so much as $10 from your grandma, it's not a cash purchase, okay? So that's another mistake a lot of people, investors make. They work with a realtor, oh, you're getting a HELOC? No, all cash means no loan is needed. So then the buyer shall provide the seller a third-party documentation reporting funds are available, no later than you would put a date in there. So what is neutral third-party documentation? It is not a Word document that you drafted on your freaking computer or anything that looks like some 11-year-old could have made with an Etch-a-Sketch that says you got money. No, it comes from a third-party documentation. They go into their bank, they get a teller stamped bank statement that dates and times the time of the deposits on there, and they say, yes, I have enough money. Okay? Now the seller has 3 days to look at it and determine if that's acceptable. So if you send over a verification of funds and it looks like something that was made on a freaking Wendy's, on a Village Inn placemat with crayon, I'm going to tell you no, and I have 3 days to reject your cash proof of funds. But if the buyer fails to provide such verification within 3 days, or if the seller fails to verify it, it's provided that it's adequate, okay? So which means that if the buyer doesn't do his job and the seller doesn't do anything for 3 days, then it's automatically assumed that whatever agreement is stands. So if you receive inadequate, right? If you represent a seller and someone brings you proof of funds and they're garbage, you have 3 days to address it. Buyer, if you send over garbage proof of funds, the seller has 3 days to reject your offer, right? He can just look at it, can be full price, cash, whatever it is, but if your proof of funds letter is garbage, he can kick you to the curb. So then we go new financing. New financing, recording is contingent on buyer obtaining financing. So here we go. Now, does the buyer need financing? What could it be? It could be a conventional loan. It could be an FHA loan. It could be a VA loan. It could be Alaska Housing. It could be rural development, or it could be other. What do you think goes in other? What happens in other? Hold on, let me bring up, I got to bring up my chat box. I lost my chat box. I don't know what I'm doing here. There it is. Okay, so what happens in other? That would be your hard money loan. Other, it's contingent upon me getting a hard money loan from Larry's House of Hard Money and Poodle Grooming. Okay, from Doug's Hard Money Emporium. All right, and if you are using a hard money loan, on or before a date, the buyer will provide a seller from whatever the lender is, verifying that they have the acceptance. So this is where we go into. Now we go into what a 90% letter, okay? Hold on just 1 second. Let me move this around. I got some stuff on my screen I need to get out of the way. All right, here we go. Okay, so this is another mistake that a lot of people make. There's a lot of, when you bring an offer as a buyer, you need to provide the seller proof that either you have the cash to purchase it or you're able to buy that property, okay? And you got to look out on this, as buyers beware. A lot of lenders don't read this. And a lot of realtors who work with buyers don't understand what's here. And as a buyer, you need to be careful that you don't unintentionally put yourself in default on the contract or run into an issue. Because there's 5 very specific things that say that you have a 90% letter. And if you were swearing that you have those and later on it's found out that they're not accurate, buyer, you're in default. Your lender and you provided false documentation to the transaction. A 90% letter isn't just a letter from a lender saying you've walked in their door, you guys high-fived each other and you can buy a property. There are 5 very specific things that go into a 90% letter, or what's called a pre-approval letter. So what are they? 1, do you have a satisfactory credit report? Have they run your credit report? Have they verified that you have acceptable income? Do they know that you actually have a job? Have they verified your down payment? If there's a down payment required, have you handed over your bank statements? Okay. And have they it's verified the following, not just, oh, we asked him and he said yes. It's, did you actually verify credit report, acceptable income, source of a down payment? Availability of funds to close, because there's not just down payment, is there? There's down payment and there's closing costs, loan origination fee, attorney doc prep fee, escrow closing fee, rural document fee, RD fees, whatever all the fees, we get feed to death, right? Not just your down payment. Do you have enough to pay for all the other crap that it takes to buy the house? And is the loan contingent upon the lease or sale or recording of any other property? Which, by the way, would be a HELOC. A HELOC would mean selling or a refinance on another property. Guys, if you say cash purchase and you're getting a HELOC, which you say is as good as cash, but you don't put it underneath here and click that it's contingent on a HELOC, and you don't get that HELOC, you're in breach of the contract, you lose your earnest money. Okay, so is the loan approval? Guys, if your 90% letter from your bank does not state these 5 things, you don't have a 90% letter. And if the buyer's lender hasn't actually done these 5 things, guess what? You don't have a valid 90, you've provided false evidence to the contract, and if the deal falls apart, you're out your earnest money. Okay? Now, buyer agrees to make a complete loan application with the lender and provide verification of the seller from, which means that, okay, what is this? This is when they get their contract, how quickly will that contract be sent over to the lender to verify all this information is accurate and that it's still current? Because, you know, they may have collected this information 45, 60 days ago, and yes, it's good for now, but that's why it's only 90%. Now we need a contract. We need to look at the contract, make sure the ratios work, and then take a look and make sure everything you gave me is still accurate. Make sure the guy hasn't been laid off. Make sure anything has been cut. And if any of this has changed, right, the seller needs to know right away. By the way, if you're a buyer and you do not reveal a fact or contingency that the lender, the purchase sale does not record because of that, the buyer's in default. If you know they're going to cut your hours and you don't tell the seller, right? Or if you know something is going to pop up like you did, let's say that you know you're behind in child support, but you didn't tell anybody, and then your loan doesn't go through because the child support showed up as a lien against you before closing, guess what? Buyer, you're in default. That is a fact or contingency to the lender, and it didn't record because of it, right? So be totally honest with your lender. Now, in the event something changes, let's say that everything's going good, but during the contract, they cut your overtime and you're like, ah, crap. And you realize you can't get the loan, that's not a default, provided that you provide the seller within 3 days. So if something changes detrimental, you get laid off, your wife is sick, or there's a health issue and it's going to suck up your money. You're like, oh crap, there's something serious that's happened here. It's a new disclosure. It's affecting my financing. They're cutting it, whatever it is. As long as it's a new disclosure and something you didn't know about, you have to disclose it in 3 days. If you don't do it in 3 days, guess what? Boom, right up here, buyer's in default. You cannot sit on a material information regarding your inability to finance this property for more than 72 hours without notifying the seller in writing. Otherwise, you're in default and you lose your earnest money. Now, the buyer must obtain seller's approving of any kind of change in lender. So you can't just keep shopping lenders once you're in contract. If you're going to shop a lender and you're going to shop around after this contract is written and you try to do so, you are in default and you will lose your earnest money if the seller doesn't agree. You must understand, you must obtain the seller's approval of a change in lender, okay? You will also agree to pay all the fees and satisfy all conditions in a timely manner required by the lender, which, look at this, timely manner, okay? If you sit on your butt, if they ask you for a paycheck pay stub and it takes you 2 weeks to get it to them, when you could have done it anytime during that, and the lender comes back and says he was really slow, he didn't get his stuff, you're also in breach, buyer. Time is of the essence. Hustle your butt muscle. When the lender asks you for something, it becomes your new priority in life other than remembering your wedding anniversary. All right? This is serious. There's serious consequences to people not performing. All right, hold on just 1 second. I'm going to go back to the chat. Let's take a look at the chat. We have a question here. Hard money, hard money. What do you do if a lender gives you a letter that does not state that they verify those 5 things? Then you tell your lender to go back and give me a letter that verifies. What do you need from me? Or if you represent the seller, okay, if you represent a seller, that's why most realtors, they need to read those 90% letters. If you get an 82% letter that's missing one of those, or a 60% letter, then I spit it back and go, this is garbage. Like, it says right here, he has to verify the taxes. That means if you haven't reviewed the guy's tax returns and know that he makes enough money, you have not verified that he makes acceptable income. It says right on your 90% letter, on section, you have verified acceptable income. That's number 2. Other than credit report, you need to verify income, and you haven't looked at his tax returns. How have you verified income? So guys, you got to talk. If you represent a seller, and we're talking about $1 million, it doesn't have to be a $100,000 condo. It can be a $1.8 million 27-unit apartment building. As a guy who comes up and he says, I've been to the lender, and the lender sends me this. If he hasn't reviewed that guy's tax returns and he hasn't done it, I'm going to spit it back and go, well, that's great. This property is staying active. I'm going to continue to market it aggressively to try to find a buyer until you actually go finish your homework. I like the offer you brought us, but I have not been given sufficient evidence that you have the ability to financially purchase this property. Okay. So the answer is, if they don't do it, spit it back to the lender and say, get your crap together. If you represent the seller, don't pin to that property. Do not take it off the market, because the guy has not done the basics that's required, even under the purchase and sell agreement. All right. You guys, are you guys taking this all in? It's like, look at this. We're only into 2 pages. We got 10 to go. Is your mind not just blown yet? And I'm telling you, these purchase and sell agreements are filled with so many nuggets that people don't even understand. This is why I tell you, when you go out on your own and you say, I'm going to FSBO this stuff, guys, as a broker, do you have any idea how much I get roped into FSBO deals because they blow up because people don't know the law and don't read their own freaking contracts? Okay. Remember, this is not, we are not in the real estate business. We're in the contract business that just so happens to be in real estate. And if you want to really become really good at real estate, you know these contracts in and out, where I can tell you, all right, page, let's see, page 5, paragraph 6 deals with tenant occupied property. And then like, you just know it. Know your contracts better than anybody else. Okay. All right. We're going to go back to share screen. All right. All right. Moving on. Okay. So we've just gone through the financing terms. Now, seller financing, I want to skip through this because we're going to do one on seller financing, but do understand this is the price and terms. Okay. What is the total amount due? This means if it's and then what is the monthly payment? And that includes what % interest and how long is it amortized over. And as you get into seller financing, and we've talked to this, it's really important to understand that the purchase and sell agreement does not adequately outline seller financing. Okay, that's not the intent. Seller financing is like a complete different form. And that's where we typically go into a seller financing addendum. And there's a whole separate contract that addresses these. Now you could put the basic section of terms in here, which is how much do I want the seller to carry? What is the payment? What is the interest? Okay. What is the contract? What is the date that we're using? And then is it contingent upon the seller's approval? And then the seller has till X to approve the contract and the note date. Okay. But we won't go in that too much. This right here, this is all the costs that we typically would assume are associated with a purchase. Are there others? Yes. We'll discuss that shortly. But this is 99% of what you find. The first 2 columns here, first is you understand B is buyer, S is seller, and then who pays what? These little check boxes that you'd see thrown in here. Loan origination fee, typically a buyer's. And so what you see is all these fees, you notice it starts off with mostly, in this paragraph right here, mostly loan fees, right? Loan origination fee, commitment fee. What is commitment? That means your lock-in fee. When you lock your loan and there's a commitment for it, there's a fee involved. If there's discount points, you're buying down your interest rate. Is there mortgage insurance? Is there a VA funding fee? We talked about that earlier, right, with Laura. Is there a rural development? There's an RD loan. Is there a lender doc prep fee? By the way, lender doc prep fee and lender processing fee. Garbage fees, these right here, these are garbage. These are fees that banks like Bank of America or Alaska USA or Wells Fargo will charge you, but brokers don't charge you. These are manure. So if you guys want to negotiate, say your lender doc prep fee is horse fecal matter and lender processing fee. Most banks, most brokerages do not charge these, but banks will. That's where they pilfer you. That's where they say that they're getting you a good deal, right? But then they fee you to death. It shows up here in this garbage fees. Flood certificate, right? That could be a buyer's or seller's. Tax registration, typically a seller. And then there's there a home warranty. Okay, so we see most of these are going to be buyer's expenses involved with processing a property. Credit report reserves. So then you notice that these columns here mostly deal with buyer's expenses for the most part, with a couple shared. Okay, sales tax. Yeah, you're in Valley. You better understand there's a sales tax involved. You better mark this. Resale certificate, public offering statement. Is it a condo? HOA transfer fee, assessments, questionnaire. Who's paying for the appraisal? Owner's title insurance versus Alta title insurance. What is the difference in a title insurance, right? We won't go into that, but there's a significant difference. Title insurance, by the way, so if you guys don't understand what title insurance is, I'll just tell you this real quick. Title insurance is the only insurance policy that pays for something that happened in the past, not the future. Normally, when you go buy insurance, like you buy auto insurance, it protects you. So if you get in your car, you go down the road and you hit somebody and you total their car, it covers you. Well, title insurance is the only insurance that it protects you against liabilities from past obligations that the previous owner of your property may have been engaged in. So if the previous owner had an ex-wife or they got married and then he got divorced, and then he sold the property to you and she wasn't paid off right, or maybe he owed money to the IRS or he did something, and they don't go after the individual because individuals die. They lien their assets because their assets like land perpetual. I mean, a million years from now, that same spot will be here on earth. So they lien the land, not the individual. And then you own the property and now these liens pop up. It pays off the sins of the past, okay? So it'd be like buying an auto insurance that you jump in a car and you drive it and you discovered that a previous owner, bondoed a bunch of stuff and did a crappy job. Well, they would fix that, right? So anyway, so a little bit about title insurance. It protects you against the sins of the past from the previous owner. Recording fees, some of these are split. But I want you to look at all these fees that are involved, right? By the way, is there one fee on this contract? One fee, one checkbox noted here that on a $400,000 purchase, if it were checked in the inappropriate way, could be as much as maybe $10,000 or $11,000. What fee could be as much as $11,000 on a seller contract, on a contract? You're the seller. You didn't see it coming. You show up a title and you're paying 11,000 freaking bucks. How did that happen? Anybody? Chase Meyer says, no, here's his. VA funding fee. Guys, what is the VA funding fee? Well, it's 0.5% of a purchase price. But do you know if you've used your VA, if you're a buyer and you've used your VA loan more than twice, it's as much as 3% of the sales price? On a $400,000 property, the VA funding fee then at 3% is $12,000. Well, what if you get this and you're a FSBO and somebody marks it as a seller's expense? Dude, all you got to do is put a check mark right here. You agreed to pay $12,000. You just agreed to pay $12,000. And I will tell you something. You want to know something? And you're going to freaking think, Kevin, you're a horrible human being. I have done that. I have taken the VA funding fee with a hard-ass, pain-in-the-ass FSBO guy who didn't want to negotiate, and I clicked that it was a seller's expense. Because I represent my buyer. I didn't represent that seller. The guy was a jerk. And we got to the title company, and we got to closing, and he's like, what is this $12,000? It's right here on the purchase and sell contract that you agreed the VA funding fee is a seller's expense. You either sell us the property, you're in breach of contract. Okay? Now, I'm not trying to be a dick, but I'm just here to tell you that if you go and you're a FSBO and I know this contract and you don't, and I represent my client, I'm not trying to be, listen, I believe in win-win. I just want my buyer to win more. Does that make sense? I'm okay with a win-win transaction as long as my guy wins a little bit more. And I'm sorry if you went to court without representing or without a good attorney. And so, guys, you got to know these contracts. So your VA funding fee can be popped up as a seller's expense. You got to watch that. And oh, by the way, that's why if you get an offer and you do represent yourself, that's fine. Take that contract, shoot it over to a title company, and ask them to give you an estimated seller net sheet. Ask them to tell you, based on this contract, how much money will I really make? Okay? So let's go back to share screen. We're going back to purchase sell agreement. And guys, guess what? We're only 2 pages in. Boom! Guys, dropping knowledge bombs like a blitzkrieg, okay? So you've got your other fee. Now here's what's important. It's so important to fill in these check boxes and clear it. Why? Boom, right here. Look at this. The cost shall be paid for by buyer and sellers indicated below. The costs payable to both buyer and seller shall be shared equally, 50-50. Here, did you not see this? Buyer will pay to any fees to requirements of the lender not covered below. Guys, if it has a well and septic and you do not click that the seller's responsible for a well and septic inspection, and then the lender says, I need a well and septic inspection, or the lender says, I need an as-built, and you haven't designated who pays for the as-built, guess who pays for it? Buyer does. Buyer pays for any of these things because they're considered additional costs of sale. Listen, most of these things are not required when a lender isn't involved. You don't need title insurance. You can quit claim. I highly recommend you get title insurance. It's not required. Okay? HOA transfer fees, it may not be a condo. Appraisal, if you're buying cash, you don't need it. Most of these fees over here, you don't even, on this side, you don't even need them if there's not a lender. So the fact is, if somebody's paying cash, right, we really only have some title fees and some transfer fees that are really required. Everything else is a requirement of a lender, is required to get a loan, and therefore is technically really a buyer's expense that we're asking the seller to pay. That said, if you don't check these boxes and they rear their ugly little head later, for instance, if you don't check the as-built cert, this is a big one, because an as-built, if you can't find one, can be as much as $500 to $800. Man, if it's a property out in Meadow Lakes, out in Wasilla, and he's got to drive out there to do an as-built on a 2-acre property, that could be $800 to $1,000. Go walk the corners and find them. Okay, so these things have meanings. Make sure you understand what all these fees are, and you check the boxes appropriately. Okay, and the buyer will pay if you missed any. Funds at recording. Seller shall agree and take possession. Funds at closing shall be in the following: cash, check, interbank. Guys, cash or check or financial institution. What is not in here? What do you notice is not? There's no thing that says a stack of cash. Okay. Now you do a quick claim or something like that, but most title companies are not going to verify that cash or anything. Here's the next thing that's really important on these: wire transfer warning. Guys, this is a new one that just came out in January of this year. But here's what you do. Your licensee, your realtor, your title company will never ask you to wire money. They will never say transfer your money. If you get an email close to closing, they say, hey, wire the transfer, immediately be extremely concerned that it's fraud. Okay, there's these guys in Somalia or over in, over in Uzbekistan or whatever. They hang out in the emails of title companies and lenders that they hack, and they sit there dormant for weeks and weeks, if not months. And they create an artificial profile that looks, smells, and breathes and looks just like your lender. And they wait for it to get to closing. And then they send these fake emails. And it doesn't happen often, but it happens enough that it makes huge, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars out of whack. And they say, oh, by the way, we're ready to record. Please wire your funds. And here's your wiring instructions. Freeze right there. 99% of the chance that that's going to be false. The title company would much rather just allow parties to advise their brokers. Okay, we don't do those. We don't do this. The company will provide electronic. Neither the brokerage or the title company will provide electric transfer instructions by email. We don't email that stuff. Never does. You will be asked to bring it in a certified check and hand it over to somebody hand to hand. It's the only way we can insure against fraud, and not cash. Okay, and there's a huge paragraph on fraud. All right, moving on along. Property taxes. Property taxes and interest and loans are being assumed and prepaid rents, HOA fees. It's all prorated to the date of recording. So if it's $30 and there's 30 days in a month and you close on the 15th, seller owes for 15 days and you owe for the other 15. It's not rocket surgery, okay? But understand that they're all fees are prorated to the date of recording. Now, this is important to note because, that also has to do with rents and rent collections and all those other things and those assignment contracts. This is a big part of why when people want a seller net sheet, okay, and they're doing tax prorations, it can vary a lot. It can vary a lot depending on what day you close. What does the interest do? You guys know if you have an FHA loan, do you know that you owe the full month's worth of interest no matter what day you close on? So if you close on the 2nd of the month for an FHA loan, you still owe the full month's worth of interest on that loan if you're a seller. So it doesn't matter if you close on the 1st or the 31st. If you have an FHA loan, that interest proration it can really affect you. So that's why when you're asking your realtor, your real estate professional about an estimated net sheet, the best they can do is an estimate. You really won't know what that number ever actually is because there's so many prorations and variable expenses, and get something that's really accurate within like, you know, $150 until maybe 72 hours to 48 hours before recording. Beyond that, the best they can do is guesstimate. So don't expect them to be hyper accurate with that stuff. It's an impossible task, okay? Service agreements, unless otherwise in writing, seller will retain responsibility. Service agreements included but not to security systems. Guys, if you do not disclose a service agreement to a buyer, it is a seller's responsibility to keep paying. Think about that. You ever bought a house and it had a security system installed with it? Well, guess what? If that security system hasn't been paid off yet, or it's on a 5-year contract, if that seller has not disclosed the fact of that contract, it is a seller's expense. Seller retains responsibility for any service agreements. What other kinds of service agreements might a seller have with a contractor? Okay, and let me bring up my chat box. What other kind of service agreements might a property have that have to be disclosed to a buyer that would affect that might affect it? That's exactly right. Lawn and snow. You guys, Trevor, Anthony, right on the frickin' nose. Do you have an annual service contract with somebody? Okay. Lawn, snow. Do you have an agreement that you and the seller next door share the dumpster and it's prepaid or it's due at the end of the year? Like, what are all these other agreements that have to be disclosed? So limited to, it says including but not limited to, which means any agreements, you must disclose them, okay? So let them know. That's why you got to let them know who's paying your utilities and what you have. Here's another one, guys. If you do not disclose your service agreement for that you're providing internet, okay? And you say, well, you got to do the internet. Yeah, but at least other guys, the seller retains responsibility for any kind of service or any kind of agreements, including not monitoring systems. Could that include an advanced router system on a property that provides internet, and you just forgot to mention it? And oops, oh yeah, by the way, there's an agreement for that. The buyer goes and he wants to get his own company and save money, but discovers he can't because you bought equipment, proprietary equipment for like a GCA monitored system. Well, guess what, seller? You might end up in trouble with that one. Okay, so title and survey. Again, this goes into the title. So title is really important. Title, I would say, is probably the most important document that most people overlook. They don't take the time to read it. Guys, title is everything legal with the property. Everything is all the legal information. Who has rights to the property other than the owner? What utility companies have rights? Access, encroachments, mineral rights. Who knows what can go into a property, right? Covenants, restrictions. Can you breed alpacas? Can I have a herd of poodles? Can I be a ferret farmer? I don't care what it is. Can I have chickens on my property? You know I never realized how popular freaking chickens are. There's a whole network of people out there that are freaking chicken crazy, right? So like, hey, can I have chickens on my property? Just because the previous owner has an empty chicken coop does not mean that he's allowed to have chicken coops on it. Listen, you can operate chickens for 15 years and you finally get some Karen who lives next door who goes back, reads the covenant restrictions, and next thing you know, if it's in the covenant's restrictions, you're not supposed to have your little pet chickens. Well, guess what? Clucky McDuck has to freaking go. So read your covenants and restrictions, read your title report. So let's go in and see what it says about title reports here, okay? So the seller shall convey by statutory warranty deed, or statutory warranty deed is the ultimate ownership. It is warranted. It is insured against defects, or you could put quitclaim, right? I do not want title insurance. I'm just going to he's just going to sign it over to me. We're going to high five, create our own secret handshake, and move on. Now, the property may be subject to restrictions contained in the plat, deed, covenants, and restrictions, or on the title report. Here we go. Can I have my chickens? Can I have my ferret farm? So on or before what date the seller will, at seller's sole expense, order the report from, and here we put the title company. So what is the date that they're going to order it, and what title company? By the way, guys, it doesn't matter what title company you use. I don't know if you're aware of that. But guys, there is no cost savings in title companies. All title company fees are monitored by the Alaska Regulatory Insurance Commission, and basically they're all fixed in stone. The last thing the state of Alaska ever wants is for title companies to go bankrupt and jeopardize land ownership, which is what makes the United States really unique. So all insurance companies basically have it, it's padded, they're gonna make money, they're never gonna go under, okay? And most likely, you know, unless they're just complete buffoons. It's really a really good racket that they have, okay? That said, it's a very necessary racket. So we go into the title insurance. Oh, wait, hold on. We got a question in here. Just 1 second. Let me bring my share screen. We have a question on the text block here, chat box. And what was it? Doesn't buyer have the right to choose a title? You absolutely do. Nancy, you absolutely have the right to choose the title company, but just understand that's why as a seller, don't fight it so much, because you're not going to save money no matter what you go to. It really comes back to who has good service. Now, in this industry right now, I will tell you, Alyeska Title has the shortest turnaround times. You can still get a title report in as little as a week. But Stewart Title, UTG, Fidelity, a lot of your big ones, you guys got to realize that refinances are up 80% right now. 80% more refinances due to low interest rates. It is taking them 3 weeks to issue a title report. 3 freaking weeks. I used to get them in 3 stinking days. So if you think you're going to close a loan in less than 30 days, you're smoking something funny. Okay? It can be done, but it is an exception, not the norm. Not right now with as much refinancing taking place. Closing in 30 days is a Jesus Christmas miracle. Okay, but the seller was going to report it. Upon receipt of the report and exceptions, buyer has how many days on which to notify the seller in writing if matters disclosed in the report which are unacceptable. So you have 3 days. If 3 days go by and you do not notify them of something you don't like, it's assumed you're buying it and with the title flaws in place. 3 days. That's why they have you sign what's called a preliminary title acknowledgement. Buyer, when you get that, don't just sign it and go, oh, I got to understand that every time you sign something, it has consequences. Read it. You got 3 days. If you don't like something, you got to let them know. If not within that 3 days following the receipt. So now we got objections. Do I have any objections? Yes. Now the seller has 3 days to either correct the matters, or if the seller does not give written assurance of responsible to buyer, then they shall be removed or corrected prior to the recording date. This transaction shall automatically terminate. So if you get a title report and there's issues and you bring it to their report within 3 days, they get another 3 days to solve it. And if they can't, buyer, the seller is in default, you get your earnest money back. But there's a date here, isn't there? And that date is 3. You cannot sit your ass on that title report and wait till a day before recording and go, oops, there's a problem on the title report. Like, where the hell have you been? Okay. After recording, buyers shall receive their own standard form of title insurance. That's the Alta title and their property insurance. To the buyer, the amount of the purchase price, free and clear of objections and all other exceptions, which means, hey, if they get a warranty deed, everything's gonna be clear. Mineral rights don't pass with the property. Okay, that's the state of Alaska. And neither the seller or the licensees make any representations to the lot corners or boundary lines. Guys, those are estimates. I don't know if a little kid went out there and moved crap, moved the flag, who knows, okay? Buyer accepts sole responsibility for identifying the corner lots. That is a buyer's responsibility, is not the seller. It is not assumed that the ones in the lot are even freaking accurate. It is your job to verify that. How do you verify it? With an as-built. And oh, by the way, here it is. As-built survey or recertification means that they go out and do it, shall be done by this date. If they click this, as required by lender or title company, which means, hey, maybe I have an old one that works, but if I need a new one, if this is clicked, but guess what? This isn't, and the lender comes back and says, hey, you stated down here on this section that as required by title company, and the title company or lender say, yes, we want an updated as-built, and this is clicked, who's paying for it? The lender requires it, and you didn't click this box. Who pays for it? The buyer does. Okay? So understand that not everything that the lender throws at you is automatically a seller's expense. All right, guys, ready? Are you ready for the most overlooked section of a purchase and sell agreement ever? Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Who's ready for the most overlooked section in a purchase and sell agreement? As a broker, I got to go around and smack people about voraciously about the head and neck, okay? Like a Laurel and Hardy freaking cartoon or old movie, and say, how did you not miss this, people? Get your circus clown of a real estate transaction. Now, they snuck this in. This changed probably about 2 years ago, and people still haven't caught on to this, okay? I'm going to show you what it says here. Okay, let's blow this up nice and big. Let's make it nice and large here. Where's my little, here we go. Okay, we're going to look at this paragraph here. Lead-based paint. Unless exempt, if the improvements on the property include one or more residential dwellings, one or more, means you get a multiple dwelling, constructed prior to January 1st, 1978, the buyer shall not be obligated under the terms of this purchase and sell agreement unless a accompanied lead-based disclosure form is signed by the seller and the seller's real estate licensees, which must occur before the parties sign this agreement.
Wonderful.
Okay. The buyer shall not be obligated to the purchase and sell agreement unless a lead-based paint form is signed by the seller and provided to the buyer before the purchase and sell agreement. What does that mean? That means if you write a purchase and sell agreement on a house built before 1978 and you didn't first have your buyer sign that, this contract's not even binding. You must, as a seller and as a realtor, you must have that lead-based paint addendum uploaded and fully completed and in the documents tab on the MLS and provided to the buyer. You have to prove that it was available for them and you gave it to them. Even if they don't sign it, you have to prove that you provided to them. If you don't put that lead-based paint addendum in the documents tab of the MLS, and you guys who are public, you don't realize this, but realtors, when they look at it, there's this whole section when they look at a listing, it says, here's all the documents that are pertinent to this real estate. So they look at it, it's being disclosed, it's in the freaking listing, okay? But the public doesn't always see those when they go on alaskarealestate.com. They're not the same. So if you have somebody who's interested in your property and they want to write an offer and it's built before 1978, the very first thing you do is a residential property disclosure in this lead-based paint addendum. This right here is what we call gotcha real estate. You can have a buyer get all the way and they're like, oh man, I really don't want to buy this house. And you're like, well, you had your due diligence. You should have done all this stuff. And they're like, wait a second. I don't think I ever, and then they discover they weren't given a lead-based paint addendum. It doesn't matter. If you're trying to get that signed at the closing table, that buyer can walk, take his earnest money, and you're just SOL. Okay? The contract is completely unbinding unless you have a lead-based paint addendum to begin with. And oh, by the way, on the lead-based paint addendum, is it a house built before 1978? I mean, is a house built after 1978? No. In the lead-based paint addendum contract, the form that it's addended to that, it says any house that construction began prior to January 1st, 1978, which means even if the house was built in 1979, but it took them 2 years to build it, which means technically they started in 1977 and just finished it in 1979, you still need a lead-based paint addendum. So if the house was built in 1978, well, that's when they finished construction, but that's not when they began construction, and technically you need a lead-based paint addendum. So you guys, you got to read these contracts, okay? So Nancy says, why is that? Well, it's because of lead. Lead and asbestos were commonly used in construction up until January 1st, 1978. After January 1st, 1978, the federal government put a kibosh on it. They no longer used asbestos in construction or lead in paint. Before that, the house was a hazard. And so now they're like, well, why do you got to have that, right? So, so if we go back and if I were to look at the purchase and sell agreement, so we're going to come back to this, but I'll show you what I'm talking about. Look. You guys, oh, hold on just 1 second. I'm going to share a screen so you can see what I'm looking at here. All right. Oops, blank forms, go to blank forms, boom. And I go to lead-based paint addendum. It's just taking a long time. Why doesn't it like me? Oh, there it is. All right, if we go down, these are all, look at all these forms. Look at all these forms we have at our disposal. All right, and we go to lead-based paint right here, lead-based paint disclosure, lead-based paint disclosure residential sales. All right, so if I blow this up, okay, every purchaser of, let me make sure I got the right one, information, knowledge, okay. Every purchaser of any interest in real estate, blah, blah, blah. Look at this. EPA and HUD consider residential buildings built prior to 1978 to mean houses for which construction permit was obtained, or even if construction was not obtained, but the house was constructed started before January 1st, 1978. Guys, if you were selling a property that was built in 1978, you still got to have this because construction began before January 1st. If you have a house that was built in 1979, you might still have to use this form because if it took them over 2 years, let's say they poured the foundation and then they began it later. Guys, it's not a house built after 78. It wasn't built or was construction started before January 1st, 1978. Read your contracts, realtors, because if you don't know this, this is the kind of crap that comes back to bite people. This is where you find you find people who know their contracts and they get you with gotcha real estate, and then you get all pissed off when they manage to weasel out of a contract because we're not in a real estate business. We're in a contract business that happens to be in real estate. Okay? Know your purchase and sell agreements better than anybody else. Real estate success 101. All right, so we're going to scroll down. I know it's a lot to take in. Guys, we're only 3 pages into the purchase and sell agreement, by the way. Okay, mind blown. All right, so what else is there? Lead-based paint. There's pamphlets in here. Has the buyer received the residential transfer disclosement? Has the buyer received the consumer, the AREC, who represents who? And then again, buyer, you have up until your due diligence, which is coming up, okay, up until we get inspections, okay? Did I skip something? Did I forget? No, we're good. All right, sorry. Forgive my scrolling. All right. You have the right to look for sexual offenders that live around your property, and here's the website. You have the right to look for meth labs, and here's where you find meth labs, and you have the right to look to see if there's any agricultural or anything else. You must have this done by paragraph 10, section 1. That is your due diligence. That's coming up here. So we're going to talk about your inspections and setting dates. But you do not have all the time in the world to do this. You have the time to look for sexual offenders, meth labs, and other kinds of environmental hazards on or before the date set forth in this next paragraph, okay? You also have the right to a resale certificate or public offering statement. That's the rules of a condo association. And so here agreed that the time for the buyer to review these documents begins on the date the buyer acknowledges in writing the receipt of these documents. So it's very important that you as a seller who's selling a property, you get this to them as quickly as possible and you get their signed acknowledgement. Do not, you ride their ass about getting it signed because they have 3 to 5 days to verify and acknowledge the receipt of these documents and then look at them. But it's not until they provide you to acknowledge in writing, meaning that you can send it to them, but if a week goes by and they haven't signed that they've received them, that clock hasn't started clicking yet. So whenever you hand them a resale certificate, you better start going into crazy stalker mode and make sure they sign acknowledgement, okay? And this purchase agreement is contingent on the buyer receiving a resale public offering statement. That's this, okay? And if you receive it and they don't like it, the buyer has the right. So don't lollygag on the resale certificate. Now we get into physical inspection of the property, okay? Until the date of possession recording, which observed, seller agrees to maintain the property in its current condition. You must maintain it in its current condition. If the hot water heater fails, seller, that's on you to fix. If you spilled grape juice on the floor, seller, that's on you to fix. You must maintain it except for normal wear and tear, okay? And holes in sheetrock, scratches, damaged flooring, right? Broken appliances is not ordinary wear and tear. Buyer and seller understand that brokers and licensees are not experts in the areas listed below, so they must rely on those. Guys, get experts. Quit asking your realtor as if they know everything in the world about your heating system, roof, mechanical, electrical panel, foundation, whatever it is. That's what home inspectors are for. Okay? So, the buyer shall have the right at buyer's expense to have licensed contractors or other qualified professionals investigate. Guys, qualified professionals. Your Uncle Larry who does maintenance may not be a qualified professional. Okay? Your buyer, you are advised to use licensed, bonded, insured individuals. Okay? You cannot use Larry's House of Home Inspection and Poodle Grooming to do your home inspection unless the seller agrees. And if a seller, I'd be like, who is this guy? Nope. Go find somebody who actually is. So I will tell you this. I had a contract where we were in a due diligence period, and the buyer had a guy go out and do an inspection, a foundation inspection. This is one of my properties. He did a foundation inspection and came back saying there's a bunch of stuff wrong. Well, I went back and looked, and this guy, not only was he not a foundation guy, he was a former landscaper that owned a lawn maintenance company, and his business had gone under like 3 years prior. He didn't even have a business license. So then it's like, wait a second. And I went back and used this. I said, hold on, buyer. You sent an unlicensed, unbonded contractor to the property without my permission to investigate the property to write up defaults. You're in default on the contract. Because according to this contract, I have to pre-qualify and approve anybody who accesses my property. Otherwise, you're trespassing. You can't just send anybody willy-nilly. You have to pre-authorize it with the seller. So let's go back and show you where it says that, right? You can't just send anybody, okay? Seller to approve buyer's selection of qualified professionals prior. That means the seller has the right to say who can be on their property. And if you send somebody out who's not qualified, now I have the right, or you have the right, you can't be unreasonable, but you do have the right. If they're not licensed and insured, if you can't find them in corporate search and find out the guy's actually got a license to do what he is, don't let him on your freaking property. But the buyer can't pre-qualify and say, here's my list of inspectors. Now, the seller shall make the premises available for inspections. Buyer shall defend and identify holds some sellers. So if the guy gets hurt, buyer, that's on you. If he's walking down the stairs, buyer, that's on you if he gets hurt. This includes seller's right to recover all costs and expense occurring during such, included by attorney fees. So if the guy's going out there and he actually screws up and damages the property, buyer, you're responsible. Okay? And the provision shall survive the termination or buyer's default to the purchase and sale agreement. So buyer, be very careful. You send somebody out there and he pulls something apart and he goes, oops, I created a leak. Guess what, buyer? You're fixing it. Okay? If that inspector, that contractor does any damage or anything to that property, you're liable and it's on you, buyer. Okay? Now the buyer's inspection may include, but is not limited to. This is important, not limited to. That means all this and more. Guys, during this due diligence period, okay, which is on or before this date. So you shall have the right, again, by a specific date. We typically stick that out 2 to 3 weeks. It's anything. The buyer can, here's where the buyer gets, it sounded like they get beaten up to the buyer, but here's where the buyer really comes out ahead. All this stuff, square footage, rental lease agreements, applicable school boundaries, zoning, erosion, avalanche hazards, sex offenders, pest, structural, guys, it's anything but not limited to. That means that a buyer can go and walk the street at 5 o'clock. If he doesn't like the traffic and it's too noisy, he can default. He can say, nah, I want out, and he can get his earnest money back. As long as he does so on or before whatever date goes in here. Okay? Buyer understands that measurements for square footage dimensions may vary. It means if the square footage in the MLS is wrong, too freaking bad, it's an estimate. Okay? They may or may not know. It is your job to investigate and verify that information is accurate. Okay? Government agencies, realtors, whoever it is, they all measure differently. Some measure from the outside, some measure from the inside, some measure from the inside, but don't take closets or stairwells into condition. Like, it just depends. Buyer is responsible for researching whether property is in a fire or road service area. Guys, all this stuff has to be done by your inspection date. If you start asking for more repairs or wanting more investigations after this date, too bad. Sucks to be you. If you find something that's detrimental after this date, because you sent out an inspector to look at the property without permission. You're in default, buyer, because you did not get permission from the seller to go have somebody out there. I've seen this happen. I had a guy actually try to default on a contract. Had a buyer, this was actually one of my listings. I took the earnest money. We were in contract, all repairs were negotiated, things were moving along smoothly, and then the buyer's agent comes back with a roof invoice saying, hey, we want you to fix a bunch of stuff on the roof. And I go, what are you talking about? And he goes, well, we sent out a roofing inspector to take a look at this property over last weekend. And I go, well, you didn't have permission to have anybody on that property. I didn't give you permission to put somebody on that roof. And he goes, well, I mean, the buyer was concerned and the house was vacant. And I go, I don't give a shit what the house is vacant. According to the contract, you had till this date to get your inspections done, and you have to pre-qualify it with me. You should have called me and asked for an extension and asked for permission for somebody to climb on the roof. You're in breach of contract. And if you're trying to default on this because of a roof repair that you found after the fact and stuck somebody on there without our permission, you're in default. I'm taking your earnest money. So he got all defensive. He called his broker. And then I said, and I did some research, found out this guy wasn't even a licensed roofer. Guy didn't have a license to conduct stuff. That's why his estimate was on a Word document. So I came back and said, and I told him, I said, sorry, it sucks to be you. I completely understand if your buyer's concerned over the age of the roof. Had a chance. Thank you so much for your $4,000 earnest money. Good luck on your next transaction. And so I took his earnest money. So that's where you got to understand that you guys do not have an indefinite period of time in all of God's green earth to try to figure out when you want repairs. You have till a very specific date to get your shit in order. And if you don't, it's too bad. Okay. And any additional things that you find out, you should really try to ask for an extension on the contract to say that I need more time to investigate the property, or let the licensees involved. No. Okay. Guys, we're only 4 pages in. Probably going to have to do this in 2 sections. Okay. Next, buyers advised to search for the land use, permits, regulations. Guys, if it is the buyer's job to make sure the property zoning is for their intended purpose. This is huge, okay? If your intention is to change the zoning, it's a duplex, but you want to turn it into a triplex, and it doesn't, dude, that's on you. It's not the seller's responsibility. Now, here's where it comes in. Once you have these reports, you are to furnish the copies of the reports to the subject property at no cost to the seller. They become the seller's possession. And the buyer and seller understand that any written reports generated of inspections and investigations of this property become material amendment to the state of to the residential real estate transfer disclosure. Upon receipt, the buyer of any new property disclosure, buyer has 72 hours of which to terminate. So if you don't like what you find, here's what's important. Guys, if a buyer gets an inspection and it's a written report, you are required to give it to the seller at no cost. The seller is required by law to provide that report to any future buyer. We are a disclosure state. They now have material information. You as a buyer get indignant and you get upset and like, I paid for a home inspection. Now he has this inspection that he can do repairs and sell it to another person. Yes, that is absolutely right. He has to disclose those defects to any future buyer, and that may benefit you or not benefit you. Just understand that's the way the law works. You can't bitch about him having a copy of the report and disclosing it. He's required to, okay? But the good thing for you is you have the right to terminate the contract within 72 hours of any of those reports. You can't sit on something for 2 weeks going, do I ask him to fix it? Do I ask for repair? You know what, I'm gonna think about it. After 72 hours, it's assumed that you know about that defect and you're moving as is. 72 hours, okay? All right, so we're moving right along. All right, we're into page 5. We're almost halfway through. Buyer's repairs and remedies shall be in writing, supported by written reports. Guys, supported by written reports, if applicable, which means that you should attach the home inspection to it or whatever it is, okay? And you must do it no later than. So we have 3 different dates here. 1, we have the date by which you can do your crap and get your crap together and do all your investigation. 2, you have the date by which you ask and then send them a list with all your reports of everything you want done. And 3, you have a date by which we must be in agreement. And if we can't come into agreement, the buyer has 3 options. They can terminate, they can accept the seller's last counteroffer, or it's assumed, or you can buy the property as is. So this is where it gets interesting. You're supposed to be in agreement by this date. On this contract, page 5, section 4, this is the drop dead date. You have till this date to be in agreement or exercise these 3. If you can't come into agreement, you only have 3 days to terminate that contract. If you can't reach an agreement by this final date, again, you have 3 days to terminate. If you wait until the 4th day to terminate, guess what? You lose your earnest money. See, because right down here, if the buyer, so it says right here, buyers accept. If the buyer does not respond within this time, seller may terminate his agreement in writing within 3 business days. Or if the seller's corrections to reinspect, so this goes in. But just understand you only have 3 days. So let's read some of these other provisions. We're gonna get through this page, and we might have to continue. We're obviously gonna have to continue in the next Rex meeting. Okay. If a buyer fails to have the property inspected at all, or has it inspected but does not provide the seller a written request or a termination in accordance by this date, that's this date here, that's 10I, that's, you got to give them a copy of it, okay? Let's go back, okay? This transaction contains buyer's acceptance as is, where is, okay? If buyer, oh, excuse me, right here. Buyer accepts the property in its current condition, okay? Guys, if you don't do anything during that due diligence period or you drag ass on this date, it's assumed that eventually at some point, it's just assumed that you're buying it as is. And at that point, your earnest money is 100% non-refundable for any kind of material information. I do not care if it's a new disclosure other than, let's say, where it says the seller is to maintain the property equal to or greater condition, right? Ordinary wear and tear, which means there's stuff that is not ordinary wear and tear. Hey, I got into it and the crawl space is flooded. That's not ordinary wear and tear. Okay, but notice that after that date, it gets real hard for you to get your earnest money back. Except as otherwise specified in this purchase and sale agreement, upon recording, you've accepted this property as is, where is, with all latent defects, latent or otherwise. Neither seller, brokerage, or licensee are bound by any representation or warranty of any kind. Once you record, it's assumed you're taking it in its current condition. Now, do repairs happen afterwards? Yes, but that's why we have escrows. That's why you have money that is basically taken and held by a trust account to make sure they get done, okay? Those are the exceptions. In the event improvements on the property are destroyed or materially damaged prior recording, then at the buyer's option, this purchase and sale agreement shall terminate. So if there's any improvements, anything in the property is destroyed or material damaged, buyer, that's why the buyer does a final walkthrough 72 hours before closing. And that's further in this contract as well. Here, this is another important provision. Let me check and see if we had any questions real quick. Oops, chat. When do we have any questions? Will there be a replay that we can view? Yeah, this is all being recorded. I believe that would be the bank's problem. I don't know though, Chase Meyer, and I forgive me, Chase, we already moved on. So I don't know what that one is. Does the seller have to maintain, if it's a foreclosure with an occupant? Anthony Pikes, does the seller, so let me go back and ask some of your questions. If you guys can unmute your mic, let me just answer a couple of your questions. Okay, does the seller have to maintain the property if it's a foreclosure with an occupant? Yes. But you do have the right to terminate because there's been material changes and get your earnest money back. But it's assumed that the seller is supposed to maintain the property equal to or greater than value than when equal or greater value than when you brought the offer. Okay. Will there be a replay? Okay. Moving on along. Recording or possession. Let's see what it is. Repairs or remedies. Okay. Finishing up. We almost skipped over. Okay. We're to section 11. Here's where we were. It is the buyer's responsibility to determine whether homeowners or property insurance can be obtained for this property within time set forth in paragraph C. Okay, this can be another one that can catch you. Buyer, by paragraph 10C, okay, if we go back to 10C, that is the date by which you're going to complete your inspections. At the same time you do inspections, you have to determine whether or not you can get adequate insurance on the property. Is there a case that you cannot get insurance on a property or it's really hard? Yes. And the reason, and the thing is that let's say a property is a fourplex, but under Title 21, it's now sitting on an R1 lot, which is a single family house. If it is a fourplex, it's being sold like a fourplex, but you can't get property insurance on it because if it burns down, you got to build back a house. That's not the seller's fault. You can still buy it as a fourplex, just pay cash. It's not the seller's fault that your lender won't lend on it. The reason the lender won't lend on it is because you can't get insurance. Buyer, it is your responsibility. You guys, how many people, if I don't know if you bought it or how many realtors are out there, work with a lender and they're still shopping for frickin' insurance a week before closing? Well, that's asinine. Do you realize if you can't find adequate insurance for the property by the time you've done that, they really should be looking at insurance right out of the gate. Hey, I'm looking at buying this property. Here it is. Go find out if you get insurance. If you can't get adequate insurance on the property and you find out after this date, buyer, you're in default. Seller gets your earnest money. Okay, that's not the seller's fault that you didn't do your homework. We go into the appraisal. So now we got an appraisal. Who's going to pre-fund for the appraisal? Okay, and who's going to advance funds and when are we going to order it by? Buyer agrees to provide copies of the appraisal reports and re-inspections to the seller. Guys, in other states, this is rare, but you are required to provide the appraisal to the seller. So if the appraisal comes out $30,000 over value, the seller's going to know. Now, in other states, they don't have this. I can tell you because I bought property in Colorado, Arizona, and California, and they don't do this. They consider the appraisal as a buyer's is a buyer's cost, but you still have to, in the state of Alaska, we provide it. So many reasons not to have insurance, flood, right? Yep, okay. A house with a roof, fire, foundation damage, lenders will not lend on insurance. Yeah, it can be tough, okay? So we've got the appraisal report. Once we have the appraisal, is the purchase contingent upon the appraisal being equal to the purchase price? Obviously, this is required for FHA and VA or any government insured loan. If the completion of the purchase is contingent upon the appraisal, the property does not appraise the value, parties shall have 3 days to renegotiate the contract, okay? Basically, if the value doesn't come in on the appraisal, you have 3 days to renegotiate. If you can't come into agreement, it's a no-fault default and the buyer gets their earnest money back. In the event the appraisal generates lender-required repairs, those shall be negotiated between buyer and seller. If the buyer and seller cannot reach an agreement on repairs, within the 3 days of the seller's receipt of the appraisal, not 3 days, it's 3 days from the time that you turned over the appraisal, let them know, this purchase contract shall automatically terminate. You can't come in agreement. So what is an appraiser? Say the appraiser calls out and says, hey, you got 2 egress windows that need to be done. Seller doesn't want to do them. Buyer can pay for them. Buyer can escrow for those and still close on the property, right? Says, you know what, I'm getting such a good deal. You know what, I know this appraisal required repairs, but I'm getting such a smoking deal. Again, the house is $30,000 under the appraised value. I'll fix the frickin' windows. I'll show up at closing with the money. We'll escrow for it and I'll close. Just because there's appraisal required repairs does not mean the seller has to fix them. And if the repairs are subject to a re-inspection, means that if there is a re-inspection on the appraisal, the buyer pays for the first re-inspection. It's normally $150 to $200. So if the appraiser has to go out a second time, that is a buyer's expense. However, if the repairs aren't done right, the seller has to pay for it. Okay, now this works with re-inspection, not just appraisal, but also the home inspection. Both those, if they require inspection, the first re-inspection is a buyer's expense, and if it's still not done right, the seller has to pay additional re-inspection fees. Okay, we're going to wrap up recording, and then we're going to call it done, and then we'll pick up the rest of it on the next REX meeting. As you can see, there's a lot in this purchase and sell agreement. You are learning more in this REX meeting than most realtors have in the last 5 years of their career. Okay, recording possession. This cell shall record. That is when it changes, you know, from one person to the next through the recorder's office, or earlier by mutual agreement. Prior to recording, buyer and seller agreeing to sign all reasonable necessary closing docs and perform reasonable conditions required by the lending. If obtaining new financing, okay, here's where it gets. Look at this. It's where we start getting into some interesting stuff. If the buyer is unable to obtain a loan commitment by the lender from the recording date through no fault of the buyer, buyer shall provide written notice to seller immediately upon learning of their inability to obtain loan commitment. Okay? So what does that mean? Loan commitment from the lender. You know, a USD RD loans, those are funded by the taxpayer and they're funded by Congress in advance. And if the funds dry up and let's say the money's just not there and they can't get it, it's not the buyer's fault. As long as he immediately notifies the buyer, and by immediately we typically mean 3 days, then they can terminate for no fault and they get their earnest money back. But if you find out that your loan program or your loan approval doesn't work and you wait more than 3 days, you're considered in default. Why 3 days? Guys, you can't just sit on stuff because the longer the property's off the market, you're doing harm to that seller, okay? If buyer fails to notify inability to obtain loan commitment, such as 13 by such a date, 13A, by recording date, or is modified by amendment on trying to no fault of seller, buyer shall be in default, okay? And then finally here, unless otherwise agreed in writing, seller shall remove all debris, personal property not sold to buyer, and leave the property in clean condition. Sellers, clean the frickin' property. Don't leave them a frickin' blight. You shall also provide keys and or means to operate all locks, included but not limited to mailbox security system. So what I encourage buyers to do is do a final walkthrough 48 hours before closing. And in an ideal situation, either the listing licensee or someone meets you there to make sure that all the keys and everything work and that you have full access to the property so that everything's there. There's nothing like, oops, there's a padlock on the shed. Good luck with that. And that's where buyer may walk through the property prior recording to verify there are no material damages. And if the unit is a condo, condominium, or other interest, buyer may be required to pay a deposit. That is where the buyer may be required to do the homeowners association fee. Okay. One thing I skipped over when we did talked about lending, and this is probably a really important one that I should have paid a little bit more, that I skimmed over. But it just occurred to me that I skimmed over it when we were going through this stuff. And this is it right here. Guys, this is a big one. The buyer agrees that the interest rate offered by the lender is not a contingency of this purchase agreement, so long as the buyer qualifies herein agreed. Okay? If you bring an offer on a property and the interest rate goes up 1% and it's no longer a good deal to you, but you can still buy the property and you qualify, you're obligated to buy the property or you're in default, buyer. This purchase and sell agreement is independent and separate from interest rate up until the tones of the term no longer work. For instance, if the interest rate was like 2.5 and you could afford it, but at 3.5, your DTI and the interest and it puts the payment, that's not a default by you. But if at 3.5, you still meet the income ratios and you can still buy the property and you qualify for the loan, you're obligated to close. So that's why buyers try to lock their interest rate earlier. But here's the next part of that. If you lock your interest rate and it doesn't close on time, that's not a seller's responsibility to pay that. So many licensees try to put that cost for a lock extension on a seller, but the seller didn't have any say in when you lock that rate. Okay, does that make sense? Like a buyer's talking to their lender and like, ooh, these interest rates are really low, I'm gonna lock my loan, but you don't know if that recording date's gonna work. There may be repairs, there may be things, a contractor may take longer to get out there. The well and septic may fail and the seller may have to replace the well and septic. Well, he's already paying for a septic, they're not paying for your lock extension fees, that's on you. The buyer and the realtor, the buyer and their lender choose when to lock that loan independent of the seller. Seller has no influence, and therefore it is not a seller's obligation to pay your lock extension fees. I don't care what they are. You'd be like, well, you didn't perform on time, but the repairs, we don't know what's going to happen with that stuff. There are things beyond people's control. So understand as a buyer, seller's not responsible for your lock extension fees because they didn't get to participate in that decision-making process. 2, if your interest rate goes up and it's no longer a great deal, but you still qualify for the full loan, you're still obligated to perform under this contract. Otherwise, you're in default. Okay? And we've only gone halfway through the purchase and sell agreement, and we're out of time. Is your mind not just freaking blown with what's in these contracts? Has anybody ever taken the time to kind of walk you through that line by line and say what the ramifications are and explain that? Well, me as a broker, this is what I do every day. Every day, my job is to take, and realtors are like, I'm in a situation. And I'm like, well, let's just go back and read the contract. Let's read what you signed. Have you read the contracts lately? And I would encourage you to really do that. And I think this is a powerful course, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time to speak in this, because guys, you unless somebody goes through this line by line and you take notes, when you sit down with a licensee and you sign 10 pages of just a purchase and sell, that doesn't include the other 14 pages of disclosures. Okay? It's so important that you do your homework now and that you study and you kind of have a feel for that, because the last thing is you want to learn how to, you don't want to learn how to ride a motorcycle when you're going 120 miles per hour. That's a bad time to figure out how to control that beast, right? All right, so we're going to pick up next week. We're going to pick up on page 5 right after recording. I'm going to make a note. And next Rex meeting is going to be continuation. When we wrap up, because the rest of this goes pretty quick, when we get done with the rest of the purchase and sell agreement, I'm going to jump into some of the other disclosures, such as early occupancy agreements and other things that people think, oh, this is cool, which are huge liabilities for the properties and the purpose involved. We'll get more into disclosures next time. But this week we wrapped up purchase and sell agreements. Guys, this is why it's so important. Listen, there's good and bad in every industry, okay? There are good licensees and there's bad licensees. It has nothing. I will tell you, but if you're serious and you're making a huge purchase, just make sure that whatever licensee you're working with understands these contracts at a profound level, because I've already shown you multiple issues where even if you're a seller, if your licensee doesn't understand what the obligation is, they may be obligating you, or they may be putting you in a position where the earnest money is not enough, and if they don't perform, you're harmed, or they don't see these loopholes, or vice versa. Guys, this is a contract business. Just whoever you work with, go find yourself a real estate professional that understands contracts profoundly, okay? You will do. I don't even care if they speak with a lisp and they got a wandering eye. Doesn't matter how pretty they are. If they understand contracts, you're way better off than a pretty guy who sells you a load of goods. All right, guys. Hey, we're done for Rex meeting. You rock and roll. I know it's not the most exciting topic. I hope I made it a little engaging, and you are loved and appreciated. If there's any additional information that you want, make sure you shoot it to me. You email me. If you guys, if you're involved in a transaction or you have an issue, even if there's not a licensee involved, but you just want somebody to ask you how to word things. One thing is I'm a linguistic ninja when it comes to contracts. So I'm really good at verbalizing what the intention is and helping people iron it out. And if you're stuck in a situation, even if it's, I respect the relationship you have with your realtor, but if there's not a realtor involved, you're trying to figure out how you verbalize that, guys, hit me up. I love that stuff and I'd be happy to help you all day long. All right, man, you guys are out of here. And I'll see you next month, and we'll wrap up purchase and sell agreements. Take care, people.